Alright, so let's talk about the older system because our editor Mike, aka SkyMTL, has been teasing it for about a week on Twitter. This is Intel's Z68 platform that was launched all the way back in January 2011, but don't let its age of more than 6 years fool you. Many people jumped onto Sandy Bridge platform and they have skipped Ivy Bridge, Haswell, Skylake, and Kaby Lake entirely because there really wasn't any reason to. One of the main reasons behind Sandy Bridge's lasting popularity is this processor, the i7-2600K, which was launched for about $320 and was actually well priced compared to some previous generation Linfield processors. This is why Coffee Lake launch is such a big deal right now. After 6 years, the evolved 14nm++ manufacturing process on these new processors has allowed Intel to finally move their i7 series away from that quad-core layout that's been with us since Sandy Bridge was launched. The i7-8700K uses 6 cores along with 12 threads and it costs $360. While that's a good $40 more than the i7-2600K launched at, the premium reflects the price of inflation between 2011 and 2017, almost perfectly, so in today's dollars, this Coffee Lake CPU doesn't technically cost more. Now with its high speeds and more cores, Intel also claims that there are notable performance improvements over older processors, but that's also a matter of platform improvements too. Z68 or other chipsets of the Sandy Bridge generation are actually considered very capable by today's standards, but there are some key technologies which they are missing. Back in 2011, features like USB 3.1 Gen 2, Thunderbolt, M.2, NVMe weren't around, and even the current SATA 6 gigabits per second interface was added to Z68 through slow third-party controllers. The same goes for PCI 3.0, which wasn't natively supported by Sandy Bridge, but was tacked onto a few motherboards later on. Even though motherboards like this Asus Z370E Strix Gaming may not be all that much different from Z270, it does have more connectivity options than Z68. So you can consider that as a benefit to looking at these newer components. But what I'm after here isn't to compare Z370 and Z68. What I want to find out is whether or not people with Sandy Bridge processors should finally look into upgrading. Basically, the test setups will consist of the Z370 Strix and i7-8700K, or the Asus PZ68V Pro and the i7-2600K. Along with those, I'll be using a GTX 1070, 16GB of memory, all the other components you see in this chart. There's also a completely fresh install of Windows 10 and multi-core enhancement was turned off. The only major difference will be the memory speeds with Sandy Bridge operating at 1333 MHz, while the Coffee Lake system will be operating at 2666 MHz. To run these tests, I'm going to be using this Gigabyte GTX 1070, which should give us a good balance of performance for the price you pay. A lot of you guys came here for this, and let me tell you, the results are pretty eye-opening. At slightly lower resolution of 1080p, the results are really interesting, with the 2600K being only a few frames per second behind the new i7-8700K. Remember, 1080p is supposed to put more stress on the CPU, but it looks like the 2600K is completely able to hold its own for the most part. But there is a difference when we look at the bottom 1% frame rates. In DX11 titles like Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, and Overwatch, it looks like the 8700K delivers a much smoother gaming experience. DX12 shows both cards pretty much even though. There really isn't much to say about this 6-year-old setup of a 2600K and a GTX 680, since just adding a GTX 1070 could double or even triple your frame rates. Okay, let's move on to a bit more demanding resolution of 1440p. Now, since even more of the processing needs are directed towards the graphics card, both the 2600K and 8700K end up running neck to neck. Even those lower 1% frame rates get closer, but there are still a very few DX11 games where the 8700K provides a slight improvement in overall smoothness. But that smoothness is subjective, since it's doubtful that many will see the on-screen difference between these two processors. Meanwhile, the GTX 680 drops even further behind, since its 2GB frame buffer just gets overwhelmed at this resolution.